You'd be doing us a huge favor, Mom. That's how Gavin started it. Ilara stood behind him, hands folded on her belly, smiling, like it was already decided. My room, the master suite I'd painted myself the year Gavin left for college, wasn't going to fit the crib-changing station and Ilara's mother. Not all at once. So the solution, they said, was simple. I would temporarily relocate, just while they got adjusted. They framed it as a family adjustment, but I saw how tightly Ilara's mother clutched her mug at the table, how she didn't look at me when I said I'd think about it. The air felt rehearsed. The next day, Gavin texted me 3 listings, all senior apartments, short-term options near the grocery store. He wrote like. That made it kinder. I didn't reply. By the weekend, I came home from my shift at the library to find brown cardboard boxes in the garage. They were labeled in Ilara's handwriting. Storage Malin. Not mom, not important. Just storage. My coats. My books. The quilt my sister stitched the year I turned 50. Folded neatly beside an unused baby monitor. Inside the house, the walls had already been painted soft gray. My framed family photos were gone. In their place, abstract prints and a dried eucalyptus wreath on the door. Ilara's mother offered me lemon water. Gavin asked if I needed help booking the Uber. The lease for the studio apartment was pre-filled, sitting in a manila envelope on the dining table I once bought with tax refund money. He called it a transition, said it was just until things settled. I didn't argue. I signed the lease. I let them call me generous, helpful, selfless. At the studio, I unpacked in silence. The mattress creaked when I sat down. I placed one mug, my own, on the shelf. Brewed coffee. Sat by the window. Later that night, I texted Gavin one sentence: I'll come by tomorrow to pick up my birth certificate and the deed paperwork. He never replied. The next morning, I put on the gray sweater Gavin bought me last Christmas. He said it reminded him of cozy Sundays. It still smelled like the cedar drawer I kept it in. I finished my coffee, washed the single chipped mug I'd unpacked, and grabbed the little folder where I'd listed the documents I needed: birth certificate, medical file, house deed copy. I took the bus. When I reached the front porch, I punched in the code like I always had. The red light blinked. I tried again. Same result. My fingers paused mid-air. I knocked. It was Ilara who opened the door. Her smile was polite, just wide enough to pretend she didn't expect me. Oh, we updated the code, she said. Security reasons, with the baby coming and all. The baby wasn't due for another 3 months. She stepped aside. I walked in and paused. The hallway walls were bare. The wooden cross my mother gave me before she passed was gone. The hall table, too. Now it held a diffuser and a bowl of peppermint candies. Ilara's mother appeared in the kitchen barefoot, wearing my navy cardigan. Sweetheart, can you hand me the cinnamon? She called to Gavin, who was sitting at the counter. He stood up when he saw me like I was a client arriving too early for an appointment. Hey, Mom, you're here. No hug. No question about how I was settling in. Just a glance at the clock. I'm here for my papers, I said. They're in the study. Ilara answered quickly, already walking ahead. I followed her down the hallway. She didn't comment on the framed photo now, hanging outside the study door, Gavin, Ilara, and her parents at the lake. No space between them. In the study, my files were in a plastic folder on the bottom shelf. I made sure they stayed together. Ilara said, tapping it. I thanked her. She smiled already, turning to leave. As I reached the door to go, Ilara's mother called out, Don't forget your cardigan, dear, it's chilly out. I didn't answer. I didn't correct her. I didn't mention that tomorrow was my birthday. I just walked out, clutching the papers, already knowing what I needed to check next. I sat at the bank across from a young man in a tailored shirt who looked barely older than Gavin. He was flipping through my application, nodding along until he paused on the last page. His pen stopped moving. I'm sorry, Ms. Dorn, but it shows here that the property is no longer listed under your name. I blinked. That can't be right. I paid that house off. Years ago. He turned the monitor toward me and pointed. It was refinanced recently. You're not listed on the current deed. I didn't speak. I just stared at the screen like it might change if I looked long enough. Is it possible you signed a release of ownership during the refinance? He asked gently, like maybe I'd just forgotten something small. Something reasonable. The refinance. 3 months before the move, Gavin had asked me to co-sign paperwork, said it was to get a better interest rate for some remodeling they wanted to do. Nothing changes legally, he'd promised. It's still your house, Mom. Just better terms. I didn't read everything. I trusted him. I left the bank with a copy of the title in a folder they printed for me. It listed 2 names. Gavin R. Dorn and Marietta H. Clark. Ilara's mother, not mine. The bus ride home was quiet. I didn't have words for it yet. Not anger, not grief, just a stillness that made my palms sweat. At the apartment, I laid the documents side by side, the deed I remembered signing 25 years ago, and the one I held now. The signatures weren't forged. They were mine. I'd signed something, but not what I thought. I pulled out the binder from beneath my bed, flipped past my original will, the trust paperwork, the medical directives. I slipped in the new deed and labeled the tab replaced. Then I added another sheet freshly typed. Contingency clause activated upon title removal. Future disbursements revoked. No further financial obligations owed. I closed the binder, locked it. And that's when I remembered the tuition email Ilara sent last week, the one she hadn't meant to include me in. I once worked 3 jobs so Gavin could attend that private school with the green blazers and the Latin motto no one could pronounce. I volunteered at every fundraiser. I organized silent auctions, folded brochures late into the night, drove home in the dark with plastic trays still rattling in the back seat. When the tuition deadline came and the check bounced, I sold my mother's ring. The one she wore even when her hands swelled from arthritis. I never told Gavin that part. He just came home to find his account balance updated and a new backpack on his bed. He wanted to go to business school on the East Coast. I didn't say no. I didn't ask how I'd cover it. I just cashed out the annuity my sister warned me never to touch. That's for you when you're old, she said. I laughed and told her I'd never be old if Gavin succeeded. I skipped every vacation. Never remarried. I dated once a quiet man named Raymond who liked crossword puzzles and jazz. But Gavin didn't care for him, so I let it fade. I told myself there would be time for that later. Now, years later, I get texts when Ilara needs a recipe or when Gavin wants to know if I still have his childhood tax forms. Nothing personal, nothing tender, just requests. There's no call on Mother's Day, no card, no invitation. My birthday passed without a word, but they still included me on the tuition planning email by accident. Ilara had meant to forward it only to Gavin. She wrote, "She'll help when the time comes. She owes us that much." Owes. As if I hadn't already paid full price for a family they now handed off to someone else. I stared at that word on the screen until it blurred. Then I printed the email, slipped it into the binder behind the deed. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, a cup of coffee cooling beside me, and opened the folder. Gavin left behind the day they moved me out. Inside, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a line item labeled Shared Contribution Plan Malin. The subject line was harmless enough: tuition planning, fall deadlines. I nearly deleted it thinking it was a newsletter from the community college. But then I saw who it was from Ilara and who she accidentally CC'd. Me. The thread started with a note to Gavin. "We'll ask her for support soon. She owes us that much. And she's not getting any younger," followed by a second message. "If she wants to be remembered by the twins, this is the way." I've already drafted the numbers. Check the spreadsheet. No greeting, no context, just a plan laid out like a transaction, waiting for my signature. She owes us that much. The word owes sat in my throat like a stone. I read it again and again, until the sting gave way to something colder clarity. There was a spreadsheet attached, a neatly itemized list of tuition costs, dorm fees, meal plans, and a section labeled Family Contribution Mail-in. No question mark. No conditional phrasing. Just a fixed number. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd just delayed me until it was time to collect. I printed the entire thread. Not just the messages, but the metadata, the dates, the names, the attachments. Then I slipped it behind the revised deed and the contingency clause I'd drafted after learning I no longer legally owned the house I paid off. The binder felt heavier that day. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't correct her mistake. I left the thread untouched, unread from their end. Sometimes silence tells the story better than any outburst. That night, I made coffee and placed the binder on my kitchen table. I opened to the section I'd labeled Discontinued Agreements and added a new sheet Attempted Leverage via tuition planning email. Received unsolicited request. No obligation owed. Then I dated it, signed it, closed the binder. The next day there was a knock at my door. A polite one. Just enough pressure to sound casual. I knew that knock. It was Gavin. He stood in the doorway holding a bakery box like that would smooth anything over. Thought you'd like the lemon scones, Gavin said. They're from that place you used to love on Main. I didn't invite him in. I stepped aside. He walked in anyway. The apartment was too quiet. No television, no background music. Just the hum of the mini fridge and the soft squeak of his sneakers on the vinyl tile. He looked around, took in the small table with one chair, the narrow bookshelf, with only what I'd had time to rescue. He didn't say anything about it. He sat down like he owned the space. I wanted to talk. He began. Not about the past, just where we are now, where we're headed. I waited. We're building a legacy, Alara and I, trying to set something stable for the kids. He cleared his throat. College is coming fast. Tuition's no joke. I nodded once. I know things haven't been perfect, he said. But this is family. You've always stepped up before. We're counting on you really to help. Just until we get our feet back under us. He said it with such ease, such assumed continuity. As if the years of silence and the cardboard boxes in the garage had never happened. Like I was still somewhere on the family payroll waiting for the next withdrawal to be assigned. I reached behind me, opened the top drawer of the filing cabinet, and pulled out the envelope I had prepared. I slid it across the table. He opened it expecting a check. Inside was a printed copy of the email. The one Alara accidentally CC'd me on. I had highlighted the line, "She owes us that much." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at me like I'd just spoken a language he didn't know. I didn't say a word. He folded the paper back up slowly, the way you do when you're trying not to show your hands are shaking. "You don't have to be like this," he said, almost gently. I still didn't answer. He left the scones on the table and walked out. The envelope stayed. I called Marianne, my attorney, that same afternoon. She didn't ask many questions, just said, "Come in tomorrow, bring the binder." I did. We sat across from each other in her glass office while she read through my notes in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp. "You're not being vindictive," she said. "You're drawing a line." I nodded. "I just want it clean." The new documents were drafted that day. Gavin was removed as primary beneficiary. So was any future descendant not in active ongoing relationship with the grantor. In his place, I listed the women's shelter I used to donate to when I still had steady work. They'd started a small community grant fund for single mothers returning to school. It felt right. I added a clause that barred any family member by blood or marriage from contesting the estate. If they tried, they'd forfeit any remaining share. Marianne slid the final copies across the desk. "You'll need a fireproof box," she said. "I already have one." When I got home, I brewed coffee, opened the drawer under the bed, and pulled out the black steel lockbox I'd bought years ago, back when I still believed in rainy day precautions. I placed the new will inside, along with the binder, the revised deed, and the printed email. Then I locked it. That night, I slept straight through until morning. No dreams, no tightness in my chest, no phantom doorbell ringing in the middle of the night. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up waiting for someone to ask me for something. The next morning, I took out the old envelope Gavin had left behind and shredded it. The bakery box of scones sat unopened on the counter. I placed it in the trash, wiped the counter clean, and stood by the window with my coffee as the sun broke through the clouds. 2 days later, I got a call from Ilara's number. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. The invitation came from my cousin Tessa. A retirement celebration for her husband, something simple at a rented hall near the river. I hadn't planned to go, but she called twice. Said she missed my face. Said it wouldn't feel like family without me. I arrived just before sunset, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to Gavin's graduation years ago. It still fit. The hall was loud with old laughter, clinking glasses, folding chairs, scraping on concrete. I smiled through small talk, accepted a paper plate of pasta I didn't eat, and found a seat in the back near the window. That's where I saw them. Gavin and Ilara, all polished and glowing, standing near the buffet. The twins towered now, wide-shouldered and restless, glued to their phones. Ilara's mother stood beside them, wearing a floral wrap and holding court like she'd been born into the family. Tessa tapped the microphone. Gavin stepped up to speak, holding a sparkling cider. "We just want to say how grateful we are for all the people who've shaped our journey," he said. "Especially Marietta, Ilara's mom, who's been such a constant presence in the twins' lives. We couldn't have raised them without her." There was applause. No mention of me. Not my name, not a glance. I sat still, hands folded over my purse. Later, when most of the guests had drifted toward the dessert table, Gavin found me by the coat rack. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I followed him to the side hallway. He didn't stall this time. "We've hit a wall, Mom. Loans won't cover everything. If you ever loved them even a little, this would be the time to help." I looked at him. Really looked. His eyes didn't plead. They assumed. I took a breath, calm and measured. "I did love them," I said. "Enough to teach them what no sounds like." He flinched, just slightly. Then turned, muttering something I didn't catch. I watched him walk back to his chosen family, where love came dressed in borrowed cardigans and sugar-coated praise. The next morning, I mailed one more envelope to my lawyer. I started the letter just after sunrise, when the sky was still the color of damp ash. I didn't write it to change anything. I wrote it to empty the drawer inside me that still held their names. I began with Gavin's birth. How I held him alone in that hospital room, how I counted his fingers twice. I told him about the nights I stayed up sewing buttons back onto his school uniforms, about the day I sold my wedding band to pay for his senior trip. I wrote about the jobs I worked, the ones he never asked about, the ones I never complained about. I reminded him that when he missed curfew, I stayed up with the porch light on and no scolding in my mouth. That I gave up remarriage because he once said, "It's always just been us, right?" I wrote about the first time Ilara looked through me instead of at me, about how I stayed quiet when her mother moved in before I'd fully moved out. I listed the scones, the unspoken birthdays, the keys that no longer worked. I didn't dramatize. I didn't insult. I didn't beg. I just wrote the truth. It came out steady. When I finished, I folded the letter in thirds and tucked it into an envelope. I stared at it for a long time on the table beside my coffee. Then I stood, took it to the kitchen, and struck a match. The paper curled quickly, the ink bleeding into flame. I dropped it into the stainless steel sink and turned on the faucet just long enough to hear the last hiss of heat. Some stories aren't meant for confrontation. Some are only meant to be named and then buried. I wiped the sink, rinsed the mug, and sat by the window. The street outside was empty, soft with morning. I took a breath that didn't feel borrowed. And that's when my phone buzzed a new message from a number I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Regarding property inquiry." The message came midweek, sandwiched between a grocery store promo and a neighborhood flyer. "Hey, Mom. I was wondering if there's still a way we could work something out. Maybe we all just got caught up in the stress. Call me no apology. Just the familiar shuffle of entitlement dressed as compromise." I didn't call. I didn't answer. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I called the shelter near 9th and Bellevue, the one with the intake center for single mothers. I told them I had furniture. A few dressers, a crib still in the attic, a dining table with only a few scuffs and too many memories. They said yes. Sent a truck. Thanked me twice. The next day, I signed the final documents with Marianne. The house would go to a family with 3 kids and no grandparents. The mother cried and the office said she couldn't believe it. I told her to fill it with noise and plants and muddy shoes. She laughed through her tears. I didn't. I walked once more through the empty house before closing. The scent was different now. Someone else's air freshener. Someone else's welcome mat. Gavin didn't know yet. He found out a week later. The text came late, almost midnight. "You just gave away our legacy." I read it once, then typed slowly. "It was never yours to begin with." No reply. I turned my phone off, placed it face down beside my coffee cup, and opened the window. The air was crisp, fall pushing in through the cracks. In the drawer beside my bed, the binder remained untouched. I no longer needed to update it. Some stories don't end in fire or fury. Some end in a quiet room, a closed door, and a woman sitting in peace. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is finally stop answering and mean it.